And we're going to talk about early monasticism, and this is monasticism. Early monasticism is monasticism in the Eastern Empire, mostly Egypt, and, and some places like Syria today. So, how it started? Uh, uh, the monasticism in the Western Empire, what we know like Benedictine monastery, Augustinian monastery, Franciscan means that's Western monasticism, and this is early monasticism started in the Eastern Empire, mostly in Egypt. And how it started? And it started as a flight from temptation. Before Constantine, uh, it, it, usually Christians run away from a hostile world. They ran away from the state to avoid persecution. But after Constantine, there are so many nominal Christians, and then there are there's no possibility of martyrdom, and the narrow path for following Christ turned into a wide avenue. So many people became Christian. They don't know the meaning of baptism. They don't know the meaning of taking up the cross, etc., etc. In the past, baptism means willingness to die for Christ. But after Constantine, baptism is a means by which you can succeed. It is a path to success and luxury. So Christianity became a religion of prestigious position and privilege. It became a religion of the powerful. So there, on the one hand, there was floods of people to be baptized. On the other hand, there were exodus of people going out of the city into the desert to avoid security, comfortable living, privilege, etc., etc. Because all these comfort, privileges are the enemies for Christianity. What are the characteristics of early monasticism? I should say is simply asceticism. So it is extreme asceticism. Ascetic life was actually held in high regard among Christians. It is an ideal voluntary poverty, devotion to prayer and fasting, meditation and spiritual activity only, etc., etc. Purging of lust, envy, ambition, etc., etc. So, and these asceticism was done by solely in solitude, by solitary lifestyle, by living alone in places like in desert or cave where nobody is around. So in the East, monasticism means tension with the established church. They don't want to go along with the church. They always had tension with the established church. What is the biblical ground for this monasticism? Well, there is in the Old Testament, there is a Nazarite vow, abstaining from wine, etc. And Moses was living in the wilderness for 40 years. We have Elijah in the wilderness. We have in the New Testament we have John the Baptist, and we know we have Qumran community Essenes. We know Jesus was in the desert before he started ministry. And we know Paul was in the desert of Arabia, etc., etc. There are a lot of biblical precedents, monastic life as ideal for Christians. And the most important passages for people who search for a monastic lifestyle is Matthew chapter 19, verse 21. That was, if you want to be perfect, go and sell your possessions and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come follow me. That's Jesus' word to the young rich person. And also Luke chapter 14, 26. If anyone comes to me and does not hate his father and mother, his wife and children, his brothers and sisters, yes, his even own life, he cannot be my disciple. So only monks. So monk is a person come from the word monos in Greek, meaning alone. By monk is a person who lives by himself. And they interpreted these verses, sell your all property and follow me. And uh, if you follow me, you have to hate your father, mother, wife, children, brothers and sisters, everything behind. So they interpret all these verses in a literal way and desire for spiritual life. And so they sought poverty, chastity, prayer, meditation, fasting, and obedience in the desert by living by himself. And the most exemplary person is Saint Anthony in Egypt. And he was the earliest desert fathers who pursued the spiritual discipline in isolation. And when he was born in a rich family, and when he was but his parents died, and he inherited a lot of property. And then when he heard a sermon on Jesus' word on Matthew 19, go sell your possessions and give it to the poor, then you will have treasure in heaven. So he sold almost everything he had, every possession, and reserved only small portion for his younger sister. And later, he also read a Bible in Matthew chapter 6. Do not be anxious about tomorrow. So he then even disposed of the small reserve fund kept for his sister. He gave even that fund to God and placed her sister under the care of the uh, some sisters of the church. And then he left for the desert. And so in 285, he started. He sold all his worldly goods, and then withdrew to the desert. And he repeatedly flee from those who sought his help and guidance. He was so famous, he was so holy and spiritual, people wanted some guidance from him. So people came even to the desert to seek spiritual guidance from him. So he flee from the people who are coming to the desert, so go deeper into the desert to be alone, etc., etc. And then his life was well known because a Bishop Athanasius, Bishop of Alexandria. We're going to talk about him later. And then he he was exiled in his life many times, and then he went into the desert. And then he met Saint Anthony. He was fasting. He was eating just the water, some kind of salt, and just dry bread, a little bit of dry bread, living on that meager subsistence and seeking prayer, living a holy life. He was so much impressed, and he wrote a book about his life. So Saint Anthony became a kind of an exemplary earliest desert father. And we have a person also called, I think, Simeon. He's living alone in Syria, and he was living on a tall pillar for many decades, and he was living alone on top of a pillar so that he can meet nobody. That's how these people, Saint Anthony, Simeon, the early desert fathers, that's how they started and seek the holy life in isolation by themselves. So early monasticism is a solitary monasticism, living in the desert in solitude alone from the world. But there are different type of monasticism started to be developed by a man called Pachomius. And he actually he was a soldier, and then he withdrew from the society, and then he lived in the desert by himself. He started early monastic life like other desert fathers, but living alone was not well suited for him at all. So what he did is he set up a community of people who wanted to have a desert father's life. There are people who are seeking spiritual life, but living in a harsh condition like desert, living on a really small subsistence of food and mostly fasting, extremely difficult. It was an extreme asceticism, but it was not suited for him. It was not suited for many people. So he started community life that's called Cenobitic monasticism. Cenobitic means community in Greek, in kenosis. So it is a community of life by the people who seek spiritual guidance. And they organize community to help each other, and to live together they needed a rule, right? So they have to give up all their goods, and they have to promise absolute obedience to their superiors, and they have to work so that they can eat from it, and they have to have a designated hours for spiritual activity like prayers, fasting, Bible reading, etc., etc. And this community, so he is first person who started so-called monastery. So Pachomius he started monastery in the desert in the kind of a close desert, but close to the Nile River, somewhere there. So when he died in 346, there was 10 monasteries, and then there are 7,000 monks in 10 monasteries living together, seeking spiritual life. And then the rule that he started, that he made, became kind of the pattern for all later rules. And there was some anecdote about about how the Satan and how these kind of monk are important in spiritual world. So Satan had a council meeting, and then there were a lot of his agent demons who were gathered, and then the demons were reporting to Satan what he did to bring evil to the world. And one first demon said that I caused riots, wars, and bloodsheds. And then it took 1 month. And then Satan said, "You are so idle." He was scolded. And second demon came up, and then I raised up storms at the sea and sunk the ships. So I sent many to death. And it took a month, and he was scolded again because he was so idle by Satan. So another demon said, I kind of sowed discord at a community, and I killed a bridegroom at a wedding, so people turn into bitterness to each other, etc., etc. And there was sadness in the community, etc. It took 10 days. And then he was scourged by the Satan for his idleness again. And then the fourth demon came up, and then he said that I kind of sowed a seed of lust in the heart of a monk living in the desert. And I finally succeeded that he have a kind of a lustful thought in the night. And it took for me to do that 40 years. And Satan rises from his throne and then kissed his servant, and then he said, "Well done, my faithful servant," something like that. So this kind of anecdote was kind of showed that after Constantine, church became on open path, and their Christians were so nominal. So there's nothing holy in the church. There was nothing like holiness, obedience, and something that we want to see in the church. But how much these monks and their spiritual activity were highly regarded in the church, and how much it was regarded as the ideal of Christian life. Okay? And I'm going to talk about Western monasticism a little bit later, because this is done mostly. Saint Anthony, he started all in 285. It is before Constantine, but after Constantine, there are a lot more people were coming in, and this Cenobitic monasticism was done early 4th century. Okay,